Welcome back. Now, many Africans are losing faith in democracy because they do not feel it's improving their daily lives. Corruption, poor services, and leaders who seem disconnected from ordinary struggles have left around 6 in 10 people doubting whether democracy truly works for them. And while most still say that they prefer democratic rule, frustration grows when elections don't translate into better schools, jobs, or even healthcare, and that's when some start to see even military takeovers as an acceptable alternative. Now, parliaments could be the game changer here. By holding leaders accountable, exposing corruption, and pushing for laws that actually tackle people's everyday concerns, legislatures can show citizens that democracy is not just about casting a vote every few years. So when parliaments actively defend their term limits, ensure budgets are spent wisely, and debate issues that matter to the public, they make democracy feel real and relevant, something that people can trust again. Now, to speak more on this, we have Dr. Charles Nyuykonge. He's a peace, security, and development specialist. We also have Mathias Hounkpe. He's head of the Election and Political Process Department, ISA. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us on the conversation. All right, so let me begin with you, Dr. Nyuykonge. Now, this particular headline actually sounds grim. More than 60% say democracy is not working. Now, speak to us. What does that mean, for people? What are they actually saying they want?
Notwithstanding the fact that people say democracy is not working for them, democracy remains a preferred alternative for most people. Because as much as they have some bad taste about democracy, the alternatives of democracy have actually not been fully welcomed by the majority. What they are actually clamoring for is democratic reforms which serve the interests of the people. Additionally, poor political performance has gotten us to a situation where corruption is largely seen as the order of the day, and this has gotten so many people disgruntled and put people in a situation of apathy, hence not trusting the democratic process because, yes, leaders change or faces change, elections are organized, but the lives of the people remain the same, if not worse. And I think these are the things which make people say, perhaps democracy is not working and we need some kind of injection into the democratic models which our African countries have today. Okay.
So let's come back to Mathias and find out from him. Mathias, how do you reconcile the fact that these 66% still prefer, democracy with the simultaneous claim that democracy is not working? Do you think that this is a crisis of faith in the system, or is just how leaders ruin it or run it? All right, Dr. Nyuykonge, I don't know if you got the question. How do you reconcile that, aside the 60% who said, it's not working, 66 still prefer democracy, and you did say that it is the best option, for us. How do you reconcile these?
I think that's largely because people can see that where democracy is rightfully entrenched, that it seems to be serving the needs of the people. And we can look, for instance, at the models, whether in the United States, whether, for instance, in in most European Union countries and the UK, if we were to look at those. And yes, dictatorial regimes have actually not served the interests of the people. And the African model seems to be one which is uncharacteristic or strange in its own respect, because the model that we have in Africa, especially in some Central African countries, is one where you have staged leaders who organize elections every day, and they have translated democracy to be elections, of which that's far from being the truth. People remain hopeful, but the challenge is people are hopeful that some change can come, but the apathy is so entrenched that people don't even go to the ballot box. So what to do in these circumstances is a moot question.
So Afrobarometer points to corruption, poor services, and weak accountability as some of the drivers. Which of these three, do you think is the single biggest reason that people do not have faith in democracy?
I've read the Afrobarometer report, but I'd like to think that one of the greatest challenges that the continent faces is the triple challenge of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. And as long as the leaders of today are not addressing these triple challenges, the apathy around leadership, around politics, around democracy, and around elections is going to continue.
Okay, now parliaments are being called a fix. What can they do right now to show these citizens that democracy can deliver?
Four things. The first one is if parliaments can actually prioritize governance reforms, they would be demonstrating that they are aware of the instinct or the feeling that democracy is not working, or that many people are actually not trusting the democratic process, even if it is just fanfare. As long as they can actually make it very clear the democratic model that people seem to have lost faith in, that they are focusing on trying to fix that. The second is focusing on delivering democratic dividends. Parliaments change day in, day out, and it looks like they're not accountable to anybody. You become a parliamentarian, you go back to your rural community, you build a little bridge, you want people to applaud you, but that's your job. That's what you're supposed to do as a parliament. You're supposed to clamor for reforms for your people. To the extent that it is so, parliaments need to show the people what the democratic dividends are. As long as they don't show people what the democratic dividends are, as long as I have to clap for a parliamentarian to actually have the road to my village start, we are going to continue the apathy. Then parliaments need to strengthen regional and international support against the backdrop that one country is not sufficient on its own. And we need to break down the barriers that exist between African countries so that we can gain from the benefits of regionalism and the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. And lastly, there's a need to increase citizen leader responsiveness. Parliaments need to have mechanisms through which they listen to people, and not situations that we have in most African countries today, whereby when you have a dissenting view, when you are perceived as an opposition, a criminal, or a terrorist.
Okay, now, Dr. Nyuykonge, let's talk about, young Africans who are really vocal. How significant is youth disillusionment in this story? Are they more likely to give up on democracy? And what does that mean for the continent's future if they do?
I think the continent is very fortunate at this point in time to have most of its demographic be largely youthful. And we have seen that the youth have demonstrated that they are not going to stand by and watch what our generation has actually watched to stay, to grow up to this age. And I come from Cameroon and I've had just one president. The youth are actually raising their voices and saying, no, enough is enough. If we are not going to get you out through the ballot box, we're going to stay on the streets, or we're going to support military coups. So the youth are not getting tired of alternatives. And we have seen that, for instance, in Kenya, where the youth actually pressed for reforms and the government caged in. So I'm very hopeful for the youth of Africa that change is going to come through them.
Okay, so but then how big a role, does poor electoral quality, I'm talking about fraud, contested results, weak electoral bodies, how big a role do they play versus everyday governance failures, in shaping this amount of dissatisfaction?
It plays a major role in the sense that the electoral apathy has created a situation where most people don't actually vote. There's the distinction between those who qualify to vote and those who actually vote. And the youth are standing and they're watching that. And they are aware of the fact that this is clear, that those who hold power and who have held power for 20, 30 years, and in some cases 40 years, that these are not going to relinquish power. And that is why the youth are becoming defiant to say, not under our watch shall this kind of system continue.
All right, so just before we wrap up, speak to us. I hear you when you say you are from Cameroon and you've only had one president. But if we're to track real change, what should we watch in the next year? Should we hope for more parliamentary debates, tighter budgets, or actual corruption cases being prosecuted?
That is actually what we should aspire for. But whether or not that is going to translate itself to reality, my guess is as good as yours. I think the leaders of today and those who have held power for so long would struggle to relinquish it. We might, and I fear to say that sometimes supporting military coups might seem bad, but sometimes we need to read into the script to see that there are good and there are bad coups. Some coups have actually led the countries to positive futures, although by and large we should frown at coups, but we need to recognize that those who lead coups, they are first and foremost citizens, and when governance doesn't work right, so when institutions don't deliver, they also experience the brunt of it. And so when we are very critical of coups, we need to recognize that coups are not the solution to the democratic shortfalls, but they are an alternative to stay leaders, and sometimes we need to treat them with light critique.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Charles Nyuykonge, Africa Peace, Security and Development Specialist. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.